Where exactly are you going dressed like that? Julian Thorne's voice sliced through the penthouse silence before Ciara even reached the elevator. She froze, the red clutch slipping in her suddenly damp palm. Her pulse hammered against her throat. For a heartbeat, she wondered if she'd imagined it. Julian rarely spoke to her beyond clipped instructions about his schedule or preferences. But his voice came again, lower, closer, dangerous. Ciara, before we continue, I need to know, are you Team Julian or Team Run? Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are, and where are you watching from? New York? London? Tokyo? I want to know who's up late for this story. Now let's see what happens when Ciara turns around. She turned slowly, her breath shallow. Julian stood at the far end of the hallway near the living room, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the glittering cityscape behind him. He wore charcoal gray slacks and a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with ink that disappeared beneath the fabric. No tie. No jacket. His dark hair was still damp from a recent shower, pushed back carelessly with his fingers. And his eyes, those steel-gray eyes that had built an empire and buried enemies, were fixed on her with an intensity that stole the oxygen from the room. Ciara Ellis had worked for Julian Thorne for 14 months. In all that time, she had seen that look before. She'd seen it when rival families tested his patience. When business deals went sideways. When someone made the fatal mistake of underestimating him. It was the look that made powerful men reconsider their choices. The look that preceded consequences. But never, not once in 14 months, had that look been aimed at her. Tonight, it came with something new. Something that made her knees weak and her stomach flip. Surprise, yes. But beneath it, threading through every line of his tense jaw and the way his hands flexed at his sides, was something raw and barely leashed. Jealousy. Good evening, Mr. Thorne, she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. He didn't nod. He didn't offer his usual distant acknowledgement before returning to his laptop or the endless phone calls that ran his empire. He didn't dismiss her with the professional courtesy that had defined every interaction for over a year. He walked toward her. Each step was measured, deliberate, predatory. The warm hallway lights that usually felt elegant now felt too bright, too exposing. They caught the black silk of her gown, making it shimmer like liquid shadow against her skin. They highlighted every curve the dress emphasized, every inch of her that the uniform usually hid. Ciara's heart hammered against her ribs. Her fingers tightened on the clutch until her knuckles ached. She had cleaned this hallway 1,000 times, knew every piece of art on the walls, every perfectly placed accent table. But with Julian closing the distance between them, the space felt unfamiliar. Charged. Dangerous. He stopped 3 feet away. Close enough that she caught the scent of his cologne, something dark and expensive that always lingered in the penthouse long after he left. Close enough that she could see the muscle working in his jaw. Close enough that she couldn't pretend she didn't feel the weight of a stare traveling from her face down the dangerous lines of the gown to the heels that made her legs look longer than they ever had in her work flats. When his eyes met hers again, Ciara saw something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Julian Thorne was looking at her the way a man looked at a woman he wanted. And he was furious about it. Julian closed the distance between them with the kind of grace that made Ciara think of wolves circling prey. Before she could step toward the elevator, he moved to block her path, his body a wall of controlled menace in charcoal and white. I asked you a question. His voice was silk over steel. Where exactly are you going? Ciara's throat tightened. I have a date. With whom? Someone I met. That's not an answer. Julian's eyes narrowed, and she watched his jaw tighten. Who is he, Ciara? She lifted her chin, trying to summon courage she didn't quite feel. His name is Bryce. We met at an art gallery opening last month. Bryce. Julian repeated the name like he was tasting something bitter. Bryce Ashford. Her stomach dropped. You know him? I know exactly who he is. Julian's expression shifted, something dark and dangerous sliding behind his eyes. An investor with friends in the Kovac family. Very connected. Very ambitious. He stepped closer, and Ciara's back nearly touched the wall. What does he do, this Bryce? He works in private equity. Tech startups, I think. You think? Julian's voice dropped lower. You don't even know what he does, but you're going to a gala with him dressed like that? Heat crawled up Ciara's neck. It's just dinner and dancing. It's a charity event. At the Meridian. It wasn't a question. Julian knew. Of course he knew. High profile. Cameras. Politicians and power brokers everywhere. His gaze dragged over her again, slower this time, and she felt it like a physical touch. And you're walking in there looking like every man's fantasy. Mr. Thorne. Does he know what you do? Julian cut in. Does Bryce Ashford know you work for me? Ciara hesitated, and that hesitation told him everything. You didn't tell him. Something flickered across Julian's face. Satisfaction, maybe, or vindication. Why not? Because it's none of his business, she said quietly. And because I wanted one night where someone didn't look at me and just see the help. The words hung between them, more honest than she'd intended. Julian went very still, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Is that what you think? His voice was softer now, but no less dangerous. That I only see the help when I look at you? Before Ciara could answer, he continued, his control fracturing at the edges. I know you take your coffee black with one sugar. I know you read poetry when you think no one's watching. I know you hum old jazz songs while you work. I know you send half your paycheck to your sister in Philadelphia every month. He leaned in, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. I see you, Ciara. I've always seen you. Her breath caught. Julian. You're not on my time right now, she managed, desperate to regain some equilibrium. I clocked out an hour ago. Where I go and who I see is my business. Julian's eyes flashed, and for a moment she thought she'd pushed too far. His hand came up, palm flat against the wall beside her head, caging her without touching her. You're always on my time. His voice was a low rasp that sent shivers down her spine. You live in my home. You move through my world. You exist in my space. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. That makes you my concern. I'm not your property. No, he agreed, and something in his expression made her pulse hammer. But you're not his either. Julian's hand dropped from the wall, but he didn't step back. Instead, his fingers wrapped gently around her wrist, not restraining, but guiding. Come with me. He led her across the penthouse to the massive windows that overlooked the city. Manhattan spread below them like a sea of light, endless and glittering, the kind of view that reminded you how small you were and how vast the world could be. Julian positioned her directly in front of the glass, then stepped behind her, close enough that she could feel him without him touching her. Look at yourself, he commanded softly. Ciara's eyes found her reflection in the darkened glass. The black silk gown caught the ambient light, making her look like she was made of shadows and starlight. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves over bare shoulders. The woman staring back at her looked confident, elegant, beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Behind her, Julian's reflection was all dark intensity, tall, broad-shouldered, his steel-gray eyes locked on her image with an expression she couldn't quite read. That's not my maid, he murmured, his voice low enough that she felt it more than heard it. That's a woman who could bring kingdoms to their knees. Heat bloomed in her chest and spread outward. His hands came up, hovering near her shoulders, close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from his palms, but not quite touching. The restraint in that gesture, the visible effort it took him not to close that final inch, made something inside her tremble. You think I don't notice you, Julian continued, his reflection meeting hers in the glass. But I notice everything, Ciara. I know how you organize the books on my shelves by color, because you think it looks better than alphabetical. I know you always brew a second pot of coffee at 3 in the afternoon because that's when you need it most. I know you read Neruda when you're sad and Bukowski when you're angry. Ciara's breath stuttered. She'd had no idea he paid that kind of attention. She'd spent 14 months trying to be invisible, and apparently, she'd failed spectacularly. I know, Julian said, his voice dropping even lower, that when you think you're alone, you hum Georgia on my mind while you work. She couldn't speak. Couldn't move. The city lights blurred in her vision as tears she didn't expect pricked at the corners of her eyes. Julian stepped back, breaking the spell, and pulled his phone from his pocket. He pressed a number and lifted it to his ear, his eyes never leaving her reflection. Daniel. His voice shifted, all business now, cold and commanding. The Ellis woman goes nowhere tonight without full coverage. I want 2 cars for men minimum. Discreet but present. He paused, listening. No, not a request. Do it now. Julian, that's not necessary, Ciara started, turning to face him. You're going into my world wearing that dress. His tone brooked no argument. You'll be protected whether you like it or not. Before she could protest further, he held out his hand. Your phone. She hesitated, then pulled it from her clutch. Julian took it, his fingers brushing hers, and typed rapidly. When he handed it back, his contact information glowed on the screen, not listed under Mr. Thorne or employer, but simply Julian. His personal number. His thumb lingered on the back of her hand, the touch deliberate and warm. If anything feels wrong tonight, anything at all, you call me. His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. Not Daniel. Not security. Me. Understood. Ciara nodded, not trusting her voice. Say it, Julian insisted. Say you understand. I understand, she whispered. He released her hand slowly, as if it cost him something to let go. Good. Now go. Before I decide you're not going anywhere at all. The Meridian Hotel ballroom was a study in excessive elegance, crystal chandeliers dripping light like frozen waterfalls, champagne flowing in endless golden streams, designer gowns in every jewel tone sweeping across marble floors. Old money mingled with new power, politicians smiled with practiced charm, and somewhere a string quartet played Vivaldi like the world wasn't burning outside these gilded walls. Bryce Ashford was waiting at the entrance in a navy Tom Ford suit, his smile bright and practiced. Ciara. Wow. His eyes traveled over her with the kind of appreciation that felt rehearsed, shallow, like he was checking boxes on a mental list. You look incredible. Thank you, she said, accepting his offered arm. He led her inside, already talking about the guest list, who mattered, who didn't, which conversations could advance his portfolio. Ciara smiled and nodded at the right moments, but something felt off. Wrong. Like wearing shoes that almost fit but pinched in places you couldn't see. By their second glass of champagne, the mask started slipping. You really do clean up remarkably well, Bryce said, his tone light but edged with something else. For someone in service, I mean. I wouldn't have guessed you were the help if I'd seen you here first. Ciara's smile froze. Thank you. No, it's a compliment. He squeezed her elbow, oblivious. So tell me, this employer of yours, Julian Thorne, right? What's his schedule like? Does he travel much? I've been trying to get a meeting with him for months. Her stomach tightened. I don't discuss my employer's private matters. Of course. Professional discretion. Bryce laughed, but his eyes were calculating. But surely you know his business associates? His security setup? I mean, you're in his home every day. Bryce. It's just networking, Ciara. How the world works. He leaned closer, his cologne too strong, too sweet. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. She was about to respond when she felt it, a shift in the room's energy, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they changed tenor. Postures straightened. Eyes cut toward the entrance. Julian had arrived. He stood across the ballroom in a midnight black suit that looked like it had been tailored by angels with a vendetta. He was talking to Senator Reynolds, his posture relaxed, but Ciara knew better. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the controlled stillness that preceded violence. And his eyes, those steel-gray eyes, swept the room with predatory precision until they found her. The world narrowed to that single point of connection. Bryce followed her gaze and went pale. Wait, that's your employer. Ciara couldn't answer. Couldn't breathe. Julian was looking at her the way wolves looked at territory they'd claimed, and the heat in that stare made her skin burn beneath the silk. Jesus Christ, Bryce muttered, laughing nervously. No wonder you're so secretive. Does he know you're here with me? Before Ciara could form words, Julian finished his conversation with a single curt nod and began moving through the crowd. People parted for him instinctively, some out of respect, others out of self-preservation. His gaze never left Ciara, and the possessive intensity in it made her heart hammer against her ribs. Bryce's hand tightened on her elbow. Ciara, maybe we should. But Julian was already there, towering over them both, his presence filling the space like smoke. Ashford, he said, his voice cordial but lined with steel. I didn't realize you'd be here tonight. Mr. Thorne. Bryce's smile was strained. I was just leaving, Julian finished, his eyes sliding to Ciara. This dance is mine. It wasn't a request. Julian's hand extended toward Ciara with the kind of certainty that didn't allow for refusal. His gray eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made the rest of the ballroom fade into irrelevance. Mr. Thorne, we were just about to, Bryce started, his smile strained. Julian's gaze shifted to him for one brief, devastating moment. The look promised consequences without a single word spoken. Bryce's protest died in his throat. This dance is mine, Julian repeated, his attention returning to Ciara. Her hand moved his before her brain could catch up with her body. His fingers closed around hers, warm, possessive, deliberate, and he pulled her onto the dance floor just as a waltz began. The string quartet's music swelled, romantic and haunting, as Julian's other hand settled on her waist, holding her closer than was strictly appropriate for a professional relationship or a public venue. He's been touching you, Julian stated, not asked. His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the fury beneath it. It was nothing, Ciara said quickly. Just his hand on my elbow when we walked in, and I don't care if it was a handshake. Julian's grip on her waist tightened, pulling her another inch closer until she could feel the heat of his body through the thin silk. I don't want his hands anywhere near you. They moved together across the floor with a synchronicity that surprised her. Julian led with the kind of confidence that made it easy to follow, their bodies finding a rhythm that felt dangerous and right in equal measure. Around them, other couples danced, but Ciara couldn't focus on anyone else. The world had narrowed to the man holding her, to the possession in his touch, to the way his thumb traced small circles on her waist that made her breath hitch. You're causing a scene, she whispered. I don't care. People are watching. Let them watch. His jaw clenched, and she saw the muscle tick beneath the skin. Let them all see exactly who you came here with and who you're leaving with. Julian. But he was already guiding her off the dance floor, through the crowd, past the concerned looks and curious stares, toward the terrace. The night air hit her skin like a shock, cool and sharp after the warmth of the ballroom. The city sprawled below them, indifferent and glittering. Julian released her only to brace his hands on the stone railing, his shoulders tight with tension. For a long moment, he just stared out at the skyline, his breathing controlled but heavy. Do you know what it's doing to me? He finally said, his voice rough, raw. Watching you smile at him? Watching him think he has a chance? Watching him touch you like he has any right? Julian, you're my employer, Ciara interrupted, desperately trying to grasp at the professional boundaries that were disintegrating around them. This isn't, we can't. Don't. He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes stole the words from her throat. Don't hide behind that tonight. Don't pretend that's all we are. But it is. Is it? He stepped closer, and she retreated until her back hit the railing. Then why does my chest feel like it's caving in when another man looks at you? Why have I memorized every detail about you down to the way you bite your lip when you're thinking? Why did I lie awake last night imagining what it would feel like to? He stopped himself, jaw working. Don't hide behind job titles, Ciara. Not after you walked out of my penthouse looking like every forbidden thing I've wanted for 14 months. The confession hung between them, raw and undeniable. 14 months, she breathed. From the first day, Julian admitted, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. From the moment you walked into my home. Julian's hand settled on the small of Ciara's back as he guided her through the ballroom, past the whispers and stares, past Bryce's stunned expression and the senator's knowing smile. His touch was proprietary, possessive, a claim made in front of everyone who mattered in this city. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the looks, just kept moving with lethal purpose until they reached the valet stand. His black Mercedes was already waiting, engine purring. Julian opened the passenger door himself, his hand never leaving her back until she was settled in the leather seat. Then he rounded the car with controlled grace and slid behind the wheel. The drive back to the penthouse was thick with tension, silent except for the hum of the engine and the muted sounds of the city filtering through bulletproof glass. Ciara watched the lights blur past her window, her pulse still hammering from his confession on the terrace. 14 months. He'd wanted her for 14 months. Julian's hands gripped the steering wheel with enough force that his knuckles went white. His jaw was clenched, his shoulders rigid. He looked like a man barely holding himself together, like one wrong word might shatter whatever control he had left. I'm sorry, Ciara finally whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. If I embarrassed you tonight. I didn't mean. Julian's head snapped toward her so fast she flinched. Embarrassed? His voice was low, dangerous, disbelieving. He pulled into the private garage beneath his building, the steel door closing behind them with a heavy clang that echoed in the concrete space. He parked, killed the engine, and turned to face her fully. Ciara. Her name was a rough exhale. You could never embarrass me. But I showed up with Bryce, and you had to. What embarrassed me, Julian cut in, his voice tight with barely restrained fury, was having to stand there and watch that man think he was worthy of you. Watch him touch you like he had any right. Watch him monopolize your attention while you smiled at him like he stopped, his breathing harsh. I wanted to hurt him, Ciara. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I've ordered men killed for business reasons, for betrayals, for threats to my organization. But tonight, I wanted to hurt Bryce Ashford for less than the way he looked at you. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and terrifying in its honesty. Ciara's hand trembled as she reached for the door handle, needing space, needing air, needing to think. But Julian's hand shot out, his fingers wrapping gently but firmly around her wrist. You're not going on another date, he said, his voice dropping to something quieter but no less absolute. Not with him. Not with anyone. Her breath caught. Julian, you can't make that decision for me. Watch me. His gray eyes burned with an intensity that made her stomach flip. You think I'm going to stand by and watch another man try to claim what's mine? You think I'm going to let you walk out that door in another dress, smiling at another man who doesn't deserve you? I'm not yours, she whispered, but even she could hear how unconvincing it sounded. Julian's thumb stroked the inside of her wrist, right over her racing pulse. Aren't you? His voice was velvet and steel. Then why is your heart beating like that? Why did you let me pull you onto that dance floor? Why are you still sitting here instead of walking away? Ciara couldn't answer. Because he was right. About all of it. I'm done pretending, Julian said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. The question is, are you? Okay, pause. Can we talk about that terrace scene? Julian just told her she's not going on another date ever. The audacity. But also, the way he looked at her. If you're feeling that tension, hit that subscribe button because this is only getting more intense. And share this with someone who needs a Julian Thorne in their life. Now back to what happens when they get back to the penthouse. ***. Ciara awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, her mind fog-thick and disoriented. It took 3 heartbeats to remember where she was, the penthouse guest room, not her small apartment downtown. Julian had insisted after they'd sat in his car for what felt like hours, talking in circles about things neither of them knew how to name. He'd walked her to the guest room door, his hand lingering on her wrist, his eyes asking questions his mouth wouldn't form. She'd barely slept. Now, in the harsh light of morning, reality settled over her like cold water. She dressed quickly in her usual uniform, the gray cotton dress, the white apron, her hair twisted and pinned into submission. Armor. Professional distance. A reminder to them both of what she was supposed to be here. When she pushed open the kitchen door, she stopped so abruptly she nearly stumbled. Julian stood at the counter, surrounded by fresh pastries from the French bakery 3 blocks over, cut fruit arranged in careful patterns, and coffee brewing in the expensive machine he'd never once touched himself. He was still in sleep pants and a white t-shirt that clung to his shoulders, his dark hair disheveled in a way that made him look younger, more human than she'd ever seen him. "Good morning," he said quietly, his gray eyes finding hers. Ciara's throat tightened. "Mr. Thorne, I can." "Julian." His voice was soft but firm. "Just Julian. Please." She nodded mutely, moving toward the table, already reaching for plates to clear, to organize, to do something with her hands that felt normal and safe. Julian's hand covered hers, stopping her. His fingers worked at the bow of her apron with careful deliberation, untying it slowly. "Not today." "I should." "No." He lifted the apron over her head, his fingers lingering at her waist, and set it aside on the counter. "Today you're not working." Ciara's pulse jumped. "Then what am I?" Julian's hands didn't leave her waist. He stood close enough that she could smell his soap, feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "Today you're the woman I'm trying to convince to give me a chance." Her breath stuttered. "Julian." "I cleared my schedule." His thumbs traced small circles through the thin cotton of her dress. "All of it. No calls, no meetings, no business. Just you and me." "That's not, you can't just." "I can." His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "I did." "Sit with me, Ciara. Have breakfast. Talk to me like I'm not your employer. Like I'm just a man who wants to know you." She should say no. Should insist on maintaining boundaries, on remembering her place. But the hope in his eyes, the vulnerability in the set of his shoulders, the careful way he'd arranged everything, it undid her. Ciara sat. Julian exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. He poured her coffee, black with 1 sugar, exactly how she took it, and settled across from her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The morning light caught the angles of his face, softening the hard edges she was used to seeing. "I've been in love with you for 6 months, Julian said suddenly, the words escaping like a confession he could no longer contain. "Maybe longer. I just didn't have the courage to face it." The coffee cup trembled in Ciara's hands. 6 months. At least. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Maybe from the beginning. I don't know anymore. All I know is that somewhere between you organizing my life and making my space feel like home, I stopped being able to imagine it without you in it." They talked for hours. Ciara lost track of time somewhere between Julian's story about growing up in a cramped Brooklyn apartment with a mother who worked 3 jobs and his admission that he'd killed his first man at 19 to protect his younger brother. He told her about the organization, how he'd risen through violence and strategy, how every step up meant losing pieces of himself he'd never get back, how the penthouse with its glass walls and city views was the most beautiful cage he'd ever built. She told him about her sister Maya, still in college in Philadelphia, about how she dropped out herself to support their family when their mother got sick. About dreams of opening her own boutique hotel someday, something small and elegant where people felt seen. About watching old Audrey Hepburn movies on repeat because they reminded her that grace existed even in hard times. Roman holiday, Julian said, surprising her. That's your favorite. Ciara blinked. How did you? You have it on your phone. I've seen you watching it on your breaks. His smile was soft, almost shy. You mouth along with the dialogue. She felt heat climb her neck. That's embarrassing. That's human, he corrected. That's you letting yourself feel something in a life that doesn't give you much room for feeling. The walls between them crumbled with each shared story, each admission of fear and hope. By the time evening arrived, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Ciara felt like she'd known Julian for years instead of just finally seeing him clearly. Go get changed, Julian said, standing from the sofa where they'd spent the afternoon. Something comfortable. Meet me on the terrace in 30 minutes. When Ciara emerged in a simple black dress, softer than the silk gown, cotton that moved like water, Julian was waiting. The terrace had been transformed. Candles flickered in glass hurricanes, casting warm light across a table set for two. Wine breathed in a crystal decanter. The city spread below them like an offering, a million lights promising a million stories. Julian's eyes tracked over her, and the hunger in them made her breath catch. You're beautiful, he said simply, like it was fact rather than opinion. Over dinner, something he'd had catered from a restaurant she'd never been able to afford, the vulnerability flowed easier. Julian confessed he'd never let anyone close because in his world, closeness was weakness, a target painted on the people you loved. Ciara admitted she'd never believed anyone could want her for more than what she could provide, that her worth had always been tied to her usefulness. That's not true, Julian said fiercely. You're Ciara. You're everything that's good about my life. The only real thing in it. They moved to the terrace railing after dinner, standing close enough that their shoulders brushed. The city hummed below, indifferent to the way Ciara's world was tilting on its axis. I bought you something, Julian said quietly. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Months ago. I've been waiting for the right moment, or maybe for the courage. He opened it to reveal a delicate diamond bracelet, simple and elegant, the kind of thing that whispered wealth rather than screaming it. Julian, I can't. Not because of what you do for me, he interrupted, his gray eyes holding hers. Because of who you are. Because you make me laugh. Because you see me as human. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to want something more than power. His fingers trembled slightly as he fastened it around her wrist, and that small sign of vulnerability undid her completely. Julian's fingers lingered on Ciara's wrist as he fastened the bracelet, his thumb finding her pulse point and resting there. He could feel her heartbeat racing, matching the rhythm of his own. The diamonds caught the candlelight, throwing tiny constellations across her skin. Ciara, he breathed, and then restraint shattered. His hand slid to cup her face, tilting her mouth to his, and he kissed her like a man who'd been starving. Deep and hungry and desperate, 14 months of want compressed into this single moment. She made a sound against his lips, surprise or surrender. He couldn't tell, and then she was kissing him back with equal fervor, her hands sliding into his hair, pulling him closer. The city disappeared. The terrace, the candles, the carefully constructed world he'd built, all of it faded until there was nothing but her mouth on his, and the way she fit against him like she'd been designed for this exact purpose. They broke apart, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. Julian's hands framed her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones with a tenderness that felt foreign and right in equal measure. If we do this, he said, his voice rough and raw, there's no going back. I won't be able to let you go. Ever. It was a warning and a promise, a last chance for her to walk away from whatever this was becoming. Ciara's hazel eyes held his, clear and certain. Then don't. Something inside Julian's chest cracked open, flooding him with a warmth he'd forgotten existed. He kissed her again, slower this time, reverent, like she was something precious he'd been trusted to hold. When he lifted her, she wrapped her legs around his waist instinctively, trusting him to keep her safe. He carried her inside, navigating the penthouse by memory, never breaking the kiss. The bedroom door closed behind them with a soft click. The night unfolded in whispered confessions and tender possession. Every touch was deliberate, every kiss a question answered. Julian learned the geography of her body with the same focus he applied to building his empire, thorough, attentive, determined to memorize every detail. She learned that beneath the ruthless exterior lived a man capable of devastating gentleness. In the quiet after, when the city lights painted silver across rumpled sheets, Julian held Ciara against his chest, tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. She wore his shirt now, the white cotton falling to mid-thigh, the diamond bracelet catching moonlight on her wrist. "Tomorrow everything changes," he murmured into her hair. Ciara tilted her head to look up at him. "Tell me what changes." Julian's gray eyes found hers in the darkness, serious and unwavering. "Tomorrow I tell my world you're mine. Daniel, my lieutenants, everyone who matters, they'll know you're under my protection. That you're not my employee anymore." "What am I then?" she asked softly. "Mine," he said simply. His hand splayed possessively across her hip. "My partner. My everything. And I deal with anyone who has a problem with it." The promise was both romantic and threatening, perfectly Julian, love wrapped in lethal certainty. Ciara's fingers traced the line of his jaw. "Your world is dangerous." "I know." His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "But I'm more dangerous than anything in it. No one will touch you. I'll burn down kingdoms before I let anyone hurt you." She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She believed every word. "Then I'm yours," she whispered. "And you're mine." Julian's arms tightened around her, and in the darkness of his bedroom with the city glittering below, they both finally stopped fighting what they'd been feeling for 14 months. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the penthouse bedroom in shades of gold and amber. Ciara awoke slowly, awareness returning in layers, the unfamiliar weight of expensive sheets, the scent of Julian's cologne on the pillow beside her, the diamond bracelet catching sunlight on her wrist. She was wearing his white dress shirt, the fabric soft and worn, smelling like him. She turned her head and found Julian already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. Wonder and possession mixed in equal measure, like he couldn't quite believe she was real and refused to let her be anything but his. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. "Hi," she whispered back, suddenly shy despite everything that had happened in the darkness. Julian's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "No regrets?" "None," she said, and meant it. They took their time, coffee in bed, lingering kisses that tasted like promise, quiet conversation about nothing and everything. But eventually, Julian rose and dressed with deliberate care. Charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, silver cufflinks. He was putting on armor, transforming back into the man who commanded an empire. "I need to handle something," he said, knotting his tie with practiced efficiency. "It won't take long." Ciara started to slip from the bed, to give him space for whatever business required the Julian Thorne mask. But his hand shot out, catching hers. "Stay," he said. "Not a request. I want you there." 20 minutes later, Ciara stood in Julian's office wearing one of his shirts over her black dress from the night before, feeling wildly out of place as Daniel and 3 other men she recognized as Julian's top lieutenants filed in. Their eyes flicked to her with barely concealed curiosity before settling on their boss. Julian stood behind his desk, every inch the kingpin. "Gentlemen, I'll keep this brief." His hand found Ciara's, pulling her to stand beside him. "Effective immediately, Ciara Ellis is under my personal protection. She's mine." The word landed like a statement of fact, undeniable and absolute. "Anyone who disrespects her, threatens her, or fails to show her the respect due to my partner will answer directly to me." Julian's gray eyes swept the room, cold and lethal. "Are we clear?" Daniel, a man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes, nodded carefully. Understood, boss. The others murmured their agreement. No one questioned. No one hesitated. In Julian's world, his word was law. After the men left, Julian pulled Ciara into his arms, backing her against the desk, his hands possessive on her waist. Do you understand what this means? His voice was low and tense. You're not just protected. You're marked as mine in a world where that's everything. Where people will see you and know you belong to me. Ciara's hands came up to frame his face, finding her own power in this moment. Good, she said firmly. Because you're marked as mine too. Julian's eyes flared with heat and something deeper, pride, maybe, or satisfaction that she wasn't shrinking from what this meant. He led her to the windows, pulling her back against his chest, his arms wrapping around her waist. The city spread below them, vast and glittering and indifferent. Are you afraid? Julian asked quietly, his lips brushing her temple. Ciara touched the bracelet on her wrist, feeling its weight, its meaning. She leaned back into his strength, into the solid reality of him. Terrified, she admitted. But I'm not letting go. Julian's arms tightened, and his whispered promise settled over her like a vow. Neither am I. Not ever. Below them, the city hummed with life, deals being made, empires rising and falling, a million stories unfolding. But here, in this glass tower, two people who'd been invisible to themselves had finally become visible to each other. And that, Ciara thought as Julian's hand covered hers on the railing, was worth any risk. And that's how a maid became a queen. If you loved Ciara and Julian's story, show some love, like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories that make your heart race, and share this with anyone who believes in love that breaks all the rules. And one more time, I want to hear from you. What time is it where you're watching, and where in the world are you? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing this global family. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember, never underestimate the power of a woman in a black silk gown. ****